The sea does not give up its dead easily. For Captain Elias Thorne, a man whose veins ran with salt water instead of blood, this was not a superstition but a fundamental truth of the universe. The Wanderlust was his home, a 42-foot trawler weathered by decades of honest work, its hull scarred and its engine reliable as the tide. He'd navigated the fickle moods of the Atlantic off the coast of Bermuda for 40 years, charting courses by stars his father had pointed out to him as a boy. He knew the whispers, of course, the old wives' tales sailors told in dockside bars, their voices slurred with rum and fear. The Bermuda Triangle was a tourist trap, a fantastical label slapped onto a stretch of ocean where weather could turn in a heartbeat and human error was the most common ghost. But Riddles Bay Island was different. It wasn't on any official chart. It was a cartographic ghost, a smear of green and brown that sometimes appeared on satellite imagery only to vanish on the next pass. The stories surrounding it were older, darker, and more consistent than the general triangle lore. Boats didn't just vanish, they were said to circle the island, tracing lazy, hypnotic loops in the water before being swallowed by the sea, their radios broadcasting only a faint, ethereal hum. Elias had always dismissed it. Until today. His current client was a man named Alistair Finch, a gaunt academic from some Ivy League university up north. He had money, that much was clear from the hefty cashier's check he'd handed over, and a feverish intensity in his pale blue eyes. He'd hired Elias for a 2-day, hydrographic survey of the waters around Riddles Bay Island. He'd brought with him a small mountain of equipment, humming black boxes with flickering LEDs, sonar transducers that looked like alien metal flowers, and a laptop that was always open, displaying cascades of data that meant nothing to Elias. The convergence is not merely spatial, Captain, Alistair had explained on the first day, his long, delicate fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on his water glass. It's temporal, acoustic, perhaps even conscious. The island isn't just a place, it's an event. Elias had grunted noncommittally, keeping his hands on the wheel. He was being paid for his boat and his silence, not his belief. Now, on the second afternoon, the event was beginning. The first sign was the silence. The ever-present cry of the gulls, the constant whisper of the wind, it all died away as if a great glass dome had been lowered over the Wanderlust. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on them with a physical weight. The sun, previously blazing in a cerulean sky, seemed to bleach of its color, casting the sea in a flat, metallic gray light. Fog bank, Elias stated, nodding towards the western horizon where a wall of white, solid as marble, was advancing towards them with unnatural speed. Not fog, Alistair whispered, his face alight with a terrifying mixture of triumph and terror. He was clutching a Geiger counter-like device that was clicking rhythmically. It's an acoustic occlusion field. A blanket of silence. It's beginning. The mist enveloped them in less than a minute, swallowing the world whole. Visibility dropped to a few boat lengths. The familiar horizon vanished, leaving them adrift in a formless, white void. The only sound was the low, steady thrum of the Wanderlust's engine, a sound that now felt intrusively loud. "Cut the engine," Alistair commanded, his voice tight. "Are you mad?" "In this?" Elias protested. "Do it. We need to listen." Gritting his teeth, Elias shifted the engine to neutral. The sudden silence was absolute and profoundly deafening. It was a silence that had texture, a dense, cottony pressure in the ears. Elias could hear the frantic thumping of his own heart. And then, they heard it. A low hum, so deep it was felt more than heard, vibration that started in the teeth and worked its way into the marrow of the bones. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, from the water below, the air around, the very structure of the boat itself. "My God," Alistair breathed, his eyes wide with rapture. "The hum. It's real." The hum grew, layering upon itself, a chorus of sub-bass frequencies that promised neither harmony nor melody, only a pervasive, mind-numbing presence. Elias felt a primal fear, a lizard-brain terror that screamed at him to start the engine and flee. But flee to where? There was no direction in the whiteness. "We should go," Elias said, his voice sounding small and brittle. "No," Alistair said, his gaze fixed on his laptop screen. The data was going wild, graphs spiking into impossible shapes. "We are precisely where we need to be. Look." He pointed a trembling finger over the port side. The mist was thinning, just enough to reveal a dark, jagged line on the horizon. Riddles Bay Island. It was closer than it should have been. Much closer. And they were moving. Elias stared at the compass. The needle was spinning lazily, uselessly. He looked over the side at the water. There was no wake, no churn from a propeller, yet the Wanderlust was gliding forward with a smooth, inexorable momentum. They were caught in a current, a silent river within the sea, pulling them towards the island. "We're in the grip," Alistair said, a hysterical edge to his voice. "The circling current. The stories are true, Captain. Every last one of them." Elias fought down the panic, his sailor's instincts taking over. He rushed to the wheel, shoved the throttle forward. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. He tried again. Nothing. The battery was dead, the electronics on his console dark. The hum seemed to intensify, a physical force pressing down, smothering all attempts at resistance. The island loomed larger. It was a wretched place, all sharp, black volcanic rock and stunted, twisted trees that looked like they had been tormented into their shapes. There was no beach, only a sheer cliff face rising from the water, pockmarked with dark, cave-like openings. The air carried a smell now, cloying mixture of brine, rotting vegetation, and something else, something sweet and metallic, like ozone and old blood. The Wanderlust began its first circuit. They were trapped in a vast, circular current that ran parallel to the island's coast, about half a mile out. Their speed was a steady, funereal 5 knots. It was a leisurely, horrifying cruise. Elias and Alistair were prisoners on a ghost train, forced to watch the same dreadful scenery slide past again and again. On the first pass, they saw the wrecks. They were not piled on the shore, as one might expect. They were suspended in the deep, clear water just outside the current. As the Wanderlust glided by, Elias looked down into the abyssal blue and saw a graveyard. A Spanish galleon, its sails long gone, its hull encrusted with coral, sat perfectly upright on a ledge. Next to it, a steel-hulled freighter from the early 20th century, its superstructure intact but rusted through. A modern yacht, its fiberglass hull gleaming white. A schooner, a tugboat, a fishing trawler much like his own. They were all there, perfectly preserved in the cold, silent depths, arranged in a ghastly chronological display. They were not crashed or broken. They were parked. "It's a collection," Alistair whispered, his face pressed against the cabin window. "It's curating them." The hum vibrated through the deck plates. Elias felt a headache building behind his eyes, a dull, throbbing pain that pulsed in time with the low-frequency sound. On the second circuit, they saw the figures. At first, Elias thought they were seals or large fish breaking the surface near the island's cliffs. But as they drew closer on their lazy orbit, the truth became stomach-churningly clear. They were people. Or things that had once been people. They stood waist deep in the water where it met the rock, their bodies pale and bloated from long immersion. Their skin was waxy and grey, their eyes milky and unseeing. They did not move. They simply stood, facing outward, as if standing a silent, eternal vigil. Dozens of them. Men and women, some in tattered remnants of naval uniforms, others in civilian clothing from across the centuries. "The crews," Elias muttered, his blood running cold. "Not just the crews," Alistair replied, his scientific detachment finally cracking. He pointed a shaking finger. "Look at their hands." Elias squinted through the mist. The figures held their arms slightly away from their bodies. And from their fingertips, trailing down into the dark water, were fine, almost invisible filaments, like spider silk. They glimmered with a faint, phosphorescent light. The filaments stretched out from the figures, converging towards the center of the circular current, towards the wanderlust. "It's a web," Alistair breathed. "They're connected. They're part of it." The hum changed. It developed a new layer, a whispering, sibilant quality that seemed to slither into their minds. Elias couldn't make out words, but he felt impressions, emotions, a deep, profound loneliness, an ancient, gnawing hunger, and a cold, analytical curiosity. It was probing them. Alistair began to laugh, a high, ragged sound that was worse than any scream. "It's trying to talk. It's sampling our minds, our memories. It's lonely, Captain. It's been so alone out here for so long." "Shut up," Elias roared, grabbing the smaller man by his jacket. "This is your fault. You and your damned curiosity." Alistair's laughter turned into sobs. "I had to know. I had to see." On the third circuit, the whispering became clearer. It wasn't in English, or any human language, but Elias began to understand it. It spoke in memories, in stolen sensations. "The taste of your mother's bread, warm from the oven," the voice whispered in his mind. It was his memory, from when he was 6 years old. The smell of yeast and flour filled the cabin. The feel of the sun on your face the first time you took the wheel alone. The salt sting of the wave that swept your first mate, Carl, overboard in the storm of '89. The guilt. You could have turned faster. "Stop it," Elias groaned, clamping his hands over his ears, a futile gesture. Next to him, Alistair was curled in a ball, weeping. "It's showing me my thesis, my life's work. It's showing me how small it is. How meaningless." The entity, the consciousness of the island, was not just reading them, it was reflecting them, showing them their own lives stripped of context and emotion, reducing their greatest joys and deepest sorrows to mere data points. It was a psychic vivisection. The fourth circuit brought the physical touch. The fine, glowing filaments that had been trailing from the standing figures began to rise from the water. They slithered over the gunwales, questing, exploring. They were cold and left a slimy, iridescent trail on the deck. One wrapped around Elias's ankle. It felt like being touched by a corpse. He kicked it away, his boot scraping against something that felt unnervingly like chitin. Another filament, thicker this time, snaked up and touched Alistair's temple. The academic went rigid, his eyes rolling back in his head. A torrent of images and sounds erupted from his mouth, childhood nursery rhymes, mathematical equations, the chemical formula for polyethylene, a frantic prayer in Latin. The entity was downloading him. Elias stumbled back into the wheelhouse, his mind reeling. He had to do something. He was a man of action, of wind and wood and steel. This psychic assault was a violation he had no defense against. He looked around for a weapon, anything. His eyes fell on the fire axe mounted on the wall. As he grabbed it, a filament as thick as his wrist whipped over the side and seized the axe from his hand, flinging it into the sea with terrifying strength. The message was clear: resistance was futile. The Fifth Circuit. The island was directly to their port side, the cliffs so close Elias could see the detail in the rock, the unnatural, hexagonal patterning that looked less like geology and more like circuitry. The standing figures were now turning their heads, their milky eyes tracking the wanderlust's progress. One of them, a woman in a rotting 1920s flapper dress, raised a pallid hand and pointed at him. The hum coalesced into a single, clear sentence in his mind, spoken in his own internal voice, which made it all the more horrifying. "You are interesting. Your resistance has flavor. You will become a prime node." Elias didn't know what that meant, but the promise in those words made his soul shrivel. He looked at Alistair. The man was on his knees, staring blankly at the deck. Thin, glowing filaments were now woven through his hair, creeping under his collar. He was mumbling, a continuous, low-level stream of consciousness that was no longer his own. The harmonic resonance of the silicate structures suggests a non-local consciousness, distributed intelligence using the island as a processing core. The water is the medium, the filaments the network, we are the data, we are the food. He was gone. Despair threatened to swallow Elias whole. He was going to end up like Alistair, like those things standing in the water, a hollowed-out puppet in a cosmic collection. He would become part of the island's larder, his memories and experiences consumed, his body repurposed as a sensor for this ancient, hungry thing. On the Sixth Circuit, he saw his chance. Or what he thought was a chance. The current had brought them directly opposite one of the larger cave mouths in the cliff face. Unlike the others, which were dark, this one pulsed with a soft, greenish light. And from within that light, the hum was different. It was fractured. There was a dissonance to it, a static that felt like pain. The entity in his mind recoiled. "Do not look there. That is the scar. The error. An error. A flaw in the system." It was the only hope he had left. The wanderlust continued its orbit, and the cave passed out of view. But Elias had a plan now. A desperate, suicidal plan. He waited, his body thrumming with adrenaline, for the next pass. The Seventh Circuit. The mist was thicker now, the hum a constant, physical pressure. The filaments were everywhere, draping the boat like ghostly cobwebs. Alistair was fully encased, a glowing cocoon from which only a faint, electronic mumbling could be heard. The standing figures were beginning to wade out from the cliffs, moving slowly, deliberately, towards the boat. They were coming to claim him. As the boat approached the point in its circuit closest to the glowing cave, Elias made his move. He wasn't trying to fight the current. He was going to use it. He rushed to the starboard side, where the life raft was stored. It was a small, inflatable dinghy. He manually released it, and it hit the water with a soft splash. The current immediately seized it, pulling it along on the same orbital path as the Wanderlust. But it was smaller, lighter. It drifted slightly inward, towards the island. This was the gamble. The current was a river. The closer you got to the island, the weaker its pull might be. Or it might just smash you against the rocks. Elias climbed over the rail and jumped. The water was shockingly cold. He surfaced, gasping, and swam the few strokes to the dinghy, hauling himself aboard. As he did, he looked back at the Wanderlust. A dozen of the standing figures were now climbing over its sides, their movements stiff and jerky, like marionettes. They ignored him, focused on the larger prize, on the already captured mind of Alistair. He had maybe one circuit before they noticed he was gone. He paddled furiously with his hands, not against the current, but across it, angling inward towards the island. It was like trying to swim in syrup. The hum was a drill in his skull. The whispering was a scream now, full of rage and betrayal. Prime node. You are mine. He ignored it, focusing on the glowing cave mouth. It was his lighthouse, his beacon of damnation. The current fought him, but his desperate strength and the dinghy's lighter mass were just enough. Slowly, agonizingly, he was pulling out of the main flow and into a weaker eddy that drifted towards the cliffs. The rocks loomed, black and sharp. He was going to be dashed to pieces. At the last second, he saw a narrow fissure in the cliff face, just to the left of the main cave, a sliver of darkness. He steered the dinghy towards it, throwing his body weight to one side. The rubber hull scraped against rock with a sound that set his teeth on edge, but it wedged itself into the fissure. He was stuck, but he was alive, and he was off the current. He scrambled out of the dinghy onto a narrow ledge. The fissure was just wide enough for him to squeeze through. He plunged into the darkness, leaving the terrible green light of the main cave behind. He was inside the island. The air was stale and thick with the same sweet metallic smell, but 1,000 times stronger. The hum was different in here, muffled, distorted, echoing. He was in a narrow tunnel, the walls smooth and glassy, as if melted. The same hexagonal patterning was everywhere, and it glowed with a faint, internal light, providing just enough illumination to see. He moved forward, his waterlogged boots slipping on the slick floor. The tunnel sloped downward, deep into the heart of the island. The whispers followed him, but they were fainter, confused. He was in a place the entity did not like, a place it considered wounded. After what felt like an hour of descent, the tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space. Elias stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He was standing on a ledge overlooking a colossal chamber. In the center of the chamber was the source of the green light. It was a pulsating, organic-looking mass of crystalline structures and fleshy, veined membranes. It was vast, the size of a city block, and it throbbed with a sickly, rhythmic light. This was the brain. The core of the entity. But it was wounded. A huge section of the crystalline structure was blackened and shattered, as if struck by a tremendous force. From this scar, the green light pulsed erratically, and a different sound emanated, a raw, screeching static of pure agony. Glowing, viscous fluid dripped from the wound, pooling in a phosphorescent lake below. This was the error. The scar. And surrounding the central mass, connected to it by thick, pulsing cords of light, were the nodes. Thousands of them. They were human-shaped, but fused into the very structure of the chamber, their bodies partially absorbed into the crystalline growth. Their eyes were open, unblinking, and from their mouths and fingertips streamed the same glowing filaments he had seen in the water. They were the processing units, the living components of the island's mind. He saw conquistadors, pirates, sailors from every era, all trapped, their consciousnesses enslaved, their life force being slowly drained to feed the ancient horror. This was the fate that awaited him. To become a cell in this monstrous brain. The entity's voice roared in his head, no longer curious or analytical, but furious and pained. You intrude upon the sanctum. You will be assimilated. Your flavor will become pain. From the walls of the chamber, figures began to detach. Not the slow, waterlogged puppets from outside, but faster, more agile ones. Their eyes blazed with green light, and they moved with a single, predatory purpose. They were coming for him. Elias looked from the advancing figures to the pulsing, wounded core. The scar. The error. The entity's pain was palpable here, a psychic shriek that made his nose bleed. If it hated this place so much, then this was his only weapon. He had no explosives, no weapons of any kind. But he had his body. And he had a choice. He could try to run, to hide in the labyrinth of tunnels, and delay the inevitable. Or he could charge forward, into the heart of the pain, and see if he could make the wound worse. It was no choice at all. With a roar that was torn from the deepest part of his soul, Elias Thorne launched himself from the ledge. He didn't aim for the floor. He aimed for the central mass, for the blackened, shattered scar. He fell through the air, the shrieking of the entity and the hissing of the node creatures a cacophony in his mind and ears. He hit the sloping, crystalline surface of the scar. It was not hard, but strangely brittle. It cracked under his weight, shards of black crystal flying. The viscous, glowing fluid within was like acid, burning through his clothes and searing his skin. The entity's scream was no longer just in his mind. It was a physical sound that shook the entire chamber, an ultrasonic shriek that made the very air vibrate. The green light flared, then stuttered. Elias scrambled, digging his hands into the wound, tearing at the fleshy membranes, pulling out great handfuls of glowing, wiring-like filaments. The pain was excruciating, both physical and psychic. He was being burned from the inside and out. He saw his own memories flash before his eyes, not as a curated selection, but as a chaotic, dying storm. His first kiss. The death of his dog. The feel of the wheel in a gale. His mother's bread. The node creatures surrounding the core began to convulse. One by one, their light winked out, and they crumbled into dust, their connection to the whole severed. The central light pulsed erratically, bright, then dim, then bright again. The hum became a discordant, crashing wail. The floor of the chamber heaved. Elias knew he was dying. The acidic fluid was eating him alive. But as he tore one last, thick cord from the wound, he felt a surge of something, not triumph, but defiance. The entity's voice, now a fragmented, dying whisper, slithered into his fading consciousness. Error, corruption, data lost. The green light in the core flickered one last time, and then died. The chamber was plunged into absolute darkness and silence. The true silence of the grave. The psychic pressure vanished. The hum stopped. The whispers ceased. Elias Thorne died in that silence, his body dissolving into the dead core of the thing that had consumed him. Epilogue. 3 weeks later, a Coast Guard cutter investigating the disappearance of the Wanderlust and its noted academic passenger found a debris field. It was well outside the usual shipping lanes, in an area where no island had ever been charted. The wreckage was identified as belonging to the Wanderlust. There was no sign of Captain Thorne or Alistair Finch. The official report listed the cause as a catastrophic hull failure, possibly due to an undersea seismic event. The Bermuda Triangle, once again, had claimed its victims. But the sailor who pulled a single, strange piece of wreckage from the water kept it. It was a fragment of fiberglass from the Wanderlust's hull. But it was wrong. It was fused, on a molecular level, with a black, crystalline material that was unlike any rock or coral he had ever seen. And when the labs analyzed it, they found something even more baffling. Trapped within the crystal lattice were microscopic traces of organic matter, human DNA, matched to Elias Thorne, and another, unknown biological signature that was not of this earth. The sailor, a superstitious man, threw the fragment back into the sea late one night, feeling a deep, primal dread he could not explain. And far below, in the lightless, crushing depths, something old and wounded and impossibly vast began, very slowly, to dream once more. It was a dream of silence, and of a flavor it had not tasted in millennia, the sharp, bright, defiant flavor of a man who had chosen to be a weapon. It was a flavor it would not soon forget. And it was hungry for more.